I awoke to the sound of soft, rhythmic breathing. At first I thought it was just the wind rustling the branches outside my window, but as I strained to listen, I could tell it was much closer than that. It felt as if someone or something was right there, just inches away from me, waiting for the moment I would succumb to sleep once more. Hours earlier, I had settled into my snug little house in a quiet neighborhood of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, its familiar creaks and groans comfortingly predictable. It was early March 2019, that time of year when the chill of winter still clung to the air and the long shadows cast by bare trees made the nights feel especially eerie. I was a freelance graphic designer, mostly working late into the night, so when I finally decided to call it a day, the silence of my home was my only companion. As I turned off my laptop, the soft glow of the screen faded, leaving me with only the drumming of the rain outside to keep me company. I pulled the curtains shut, attempting to block out the persistent drizzle that had turned the night into a ghostly tableau. It was then that I heard it, the flutter of my doormat against the door, a faint sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to the wind, but that was the start of something unsettling, a sequence of events I couldn't have prepared for. The first few nights passed without incident. My paranoid mind had created stories out of shadows, but I managed to convince myself that it was just the remnants of a vivid imagination fueled by late-night documentaries about true crime. I kept my home tidy, cleaning obsessively after each meal, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, but the weight of the unknown gnawed at me, especially each time darkness embraced my home. One particularly stormy evening, as thunder clapped overhead like a monster's growl, I sat in my living room wrapped in a blanket, clutching my steaming cup of herbal tea. I felt safe, cocooned in the warmth of my surroundings, but as the wind howled outside, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the unsettling noises that echoed in my ears. The breathing returned, now more pronounced, almost like an echo of my own fear, each exhale a haunting reminder that I was not alone. The next morning I jolted awake, the sun filtering weakly through the curtains, casting lines like prison bars across my bed. Shaking off the remnants of sleep, I hesitated before getting up, my heart racing from the dream I'd just had, a vivid nightmare where shadows danced around my room, whispering secrets too vile to comprehend. I couldn't shake the feeling that they had been real, that something sinister had infiltrated my life. I decided to take a stroll, hoping the fresh air would cleanse my mind. As I wandered through my neighborhood, I observed familiar sights, children laughing as they played on the street, elderly neighbors walking their dogs, and the scent of blooming flowers filling the air. Yet as I returned home, I caught sight of a car that hadn't been there before, a dark sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted so heavily I couldn't see inside. I shook it off, convincing myself it was nothing more than a coincidence, perhaps a visitor to one of my neighbors. That night, I settled into my routine, but the air felt thicker, pregnant with anticipation. The rain began falling softly, the subtle pitter-patter against the windows mixing with my anxious heartbeats. As I prepared for bed, I heard that rhythmic breathing again, this time so close that I felt I could reach out and touch it. My blood froze when I realized it wasn't just in my head, it came from behind my bedroom door. My heart raced as I flipped on the bedside lamp, the sudden brightness nearly blinding me. I could feel sweat bead on my brow. My instincts screamed for me to run. I stood frozen, listening intently. The breathing was calm, almost serene, but it was undeniably there. I tiptoed to the door, my mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. What if it was a burglar? No, it was too soft, too deliberate. It felt more like a presence, an entity that knew me and had been waiting. Summoning every ounce of courage, I placed my hand on the cold doorknob and twisted it slowly. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of stale air that brushed over me like a forgotten memory. There was nothing but darkness. I strained my eyes, looking for any sign of movement, any clue that I wasn't alone. My heart thudded in my chest as I took a tentative step into the hallway, only for a violent crack of thunder to resonate, making me jump. Peering down the hallway, I could see the shadowy outline of the living room. The breathing had stopped, and an uncomfortable silence hovered over the space. I turned back toward my room, considering whether I should retreat. But then I noticed something, a figure, a silhouette standing just beyond the flicker of the light illuminating the living room. A figure that was definitely not supposed to be there. Panic surged through me as the figure melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the dimness. I gasped, stumbling back into my room, slamming the door shut and locking it. My thoughts raced. Was I being targeted? Was there an intruder in my home? Or was my mind simply playing tricks? I called the police, but felt a wave of disbelief wash over me as I recounted the details. They reassured me they would send an officer to check on my home, but insisted I stay calm. As I hung up, the silence felt almost deafening. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing. The knot in my stomach refused to loosen, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I moved toward my window and peered outside, searching for any sign of the dark sedan, but found nothing. The streets were empty, a shroud of fog creeping in from the trees. I turned away, retreating into the far corner of my room, the shadows wrapping around me tighter than a cocoon. When the officer arrived, I felt a flicker of hope as he knocked on my door, his authoritative presence offering some comfort. I briefly explained my predicament while he surveyed the area, assuring me everything appeared normal from the outside. But the moment he departed, I was engulfed in a suffocating darkness once again. The breathing returned, louder this time, strangely rhythmic and deliberate, vibrating through the very walls of my house. Days turned into a week, and I found myself living in an altered reality, one where every creak and whisper turned ominous, every glimmer of light felt sinister. I barricaded my bedroom door each night, the anxiety gnawing at me relentlessly. I debated moving, but my ties to this home were too strong. It was where I had built my life. The dark sedan remained, a constant ghost lurking just beyond my vision every time I stepped outside. One evening, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, a loud crash erupted from my living room, sending a jolt of terror through me. The sound was visceral, a heavy object hitting the floor, followed by a deep, guttural laugh that echoed in the silence. I dropped the spatula, my heart racing as I dashed for the living room. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but curiosity clawed me forward. When I reached the living room, I found it in disarray. Furniture had been overturned. My beloved couch was ripped apart, its stuffing strewn across the floor like fallen snow. But there was no one there, only the broken silence and the remnants of chaos. I backed away slowly, heart pounding in my chest, and suddenly caught sight of the dark sedan parked outside my window, its shadow stretching ominously toward the door. Desperation gripped me. I rushed to grab my phone and dialed 911 once more. But the call never went through. The line was dead, as if a hand had reached out to sever the connection to the outside world. I panicked, fear surging through my veins. I pounded on the walls, shouting for help, but the house swallowed every sound, a dark abyss that consumed my pleas. And then it happened. The silhouette appeared again, not just a shadow this time, but a solid figure standing just beyond the threshold of my room, backlit by the flickering light. I couldn't scream, I simply stood frozen, heart almost stopping as it stepped closer, its features undefined, shrouded in darkness, yet unmistakably present. I felt the world around me narrow until there was nothing left but that horrific figure looming before me. Without thinking, I lunged for the front door, but it swung open before I even touched the handle, revealing an empty porch, no one there, just the dark sedan idling in the driveway as if it had come alive. As I stepped outside, my heart racing uncontrollably, I noticed something strange. The sedan had its headlights turned off, yet the engine purred softly, inviting me closer. I was engulfed in a whirlwind of uncertainty whether to flee or investigate. Against my better judgment, I approached the car, drawn to its promise of secrets, of answers to my torment. And as I reached for the door handle, a sudden chill coursed through the air, and I heard a familiar sound, the soft, rhythmic breathing, now clearer than ever, echoing not from within my walls, but right beside me. But as I turned to look, I saw nothing, no one hiding in the shadows or within the confines of the car. The air hitched in my throat, and I became acutely aware of the weight of the night pressing down on me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and as I did, the breathing faded, leaving only the rustling leaves to fill the heavy silence. Everything fell still, yet I knew something was very wrong. I knew I couldn't stay there, locked in that moment of uncertainty. I turned to run back into my house, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. My heart raced with fear, and I finally allowed myself to cry out, screaming into the empty hallway. But there was no respite, no expected comfort. All I could hear was my own echo, a hollow reminder that I was utterly alone in this nightmare. The next few nights blurred together as I spiraled deeper into paranoia. The breathing returned, night after night, always the same, always loud and insistent. I became a prisoner of my own house, unable to step outside or comfort myself with the mundane tasks that had once brought joy. The dark sedan remained a permanent fixture, like a ghost haunting my every thought, reminding me I was being watched. Finally, desperate, I contacted a friend, asking her to stay with me for a few nights. When she arrived, a sense of relief washed over me, and I felt safer for the first time in weeks, though the breathing still lingered in the background, a constant reminder of my terror. Each night we sat together, and I shared every detail with her, the strange figure, the laughter from the darkness, and the car that never left my sight. And then, one late evening, while we were nestled on the couch watching a film, there was a violent knock at the door, harsh, insistent. My friend and I jumped, exchanging terrified glances. I could feel the breath of fear in the room, thick and palpable. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach. She urged me to answer it, but the last thing I wanted was to face whatever waited on the other side. Against my better judgment, I stood, my feet heavy with trepidation, and slowly approached the door. I gathered the strength to peer through the peephole, my heart racing. To my shock, I found the figure again standing right outside, a dark silhouette against the porch light. My friend whispered, urging me to open it, but I couldn't move. Whatever was out there, it felt powerful, almost alive. Finally, I took a deep breath and cracked the door open, exhaling in disbelief when I saw the face of the officer who had visited me the week prior. He looked stern, his brows knitted together in concern. "Ma'am, we need to talk," he said, his voice grave. I felt a spark of hope flicker within me, but that was quickly snuffed out as I noticed the way he scanned the street behind him, glancing over his shoulder with lingering uncertainty. He stepped inside, and just as I began to explain the recent events, his expression shifted abruptly. He looked shaken. "We've had reports of disturbances in your area," he said tightly. "People seeing a dark sedan following them, and we suspect someone may be watching you." My heart dropped at his words. I could barely process the implications as I realized the figure could have been more than just a figment of my imagination, but a real threat to my life. He instructed me to stay indoors while he investigated the situation further. I felt safe for a moment, but as soon as he left, dread filled the air once more. My friend and I sat in silence, the atmosphere thick with tension. Time passed slowly, and I began to feel an overwhelming sense of vulnerability wash over me. I glanced at the window, half hoping to see the dark sedan gone, but instead, I saw it. The car was still parked ominously outside, its engine off and windows obscured. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and dimmed, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, its glow illuminating the room just enough to reveal my friend's terrified expression. We could hear the distant sound of laughter, conspiratorial and taunting, echoing from somewhere in the night, chilling us to our bones. It didn't feel like laughter at all. It felt like a sinister warning of something dreadful lurking just beyond our reach. As I scrambled to find my flashlight, the breathing returned, louder than ever, wrapping around us like an insistent ghost. My friend clutched my arm, her eyes wide with terror as I pointed the beam toward the window. Suddenly, the dark sedan's headlights exploded to life, illuminating the outside as if it were spotlighting us like prey. The laughter grew, a cacophony of hissing whispers that made my skin crawl, and as the vehicle began to inch closer, terror consumed me completely. We stumbled backward, adrenaline surging as we scrambled for the back door, ready to flee into the night. But as I turned around, I saw the figure standing in the doorway, its shape solidifying with each flicker of light. There was no escaping. We were trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from, each breath growing heavier as the reality of our situation sunk in. I would never find out what truly happened that